all the crises that we've seen over the past couple of centuries is a result of the demand side economics. If, for instance, we looked at the cause of the 2008 crisis, or assume that it was a result of low profitability, in other words, high corporate taxes or declining advancements in technology and so on and so forth, we would conclude something completely different and say that income inequality had really nothing to do with the fact that the crisis took place. And also what I found interesting was in your graph before, in the 1970s, there was the lowest level of income inequality, but again, during the 70s and 80s, there was a crisis that occurred. So so I think that sort of goes against your hypothesis here that income inequality led to the sort of.
Okay. I forget your first name.
Imam.
What income inequality to me begs the question, what is income equal? What is income equal?
I'm just assuming that everyone sort of has the same relative income, or they receive the same income.
Okay. So is there some kind of hidden subliminal assumption here that income equality leads to economic growth? Or it's just that income inequality leads to...
We were more assuming that high levels of income inequality leads to lower or hinders economic growth. Not that we don't necessarily mean to imply that income inequality would cause growth. We're not implying that. That's a separate argument, I would assume.
So it's just that super high inequality.
Or
isn't desirable.
Relatively high, like the spikes we saw in the graph.
Yeah, a
Unusual.
huge variance in income isn't very helpful.
Yeah.
A variance in income.
That it's
It's
impossible
okay.
to eliminate variance
Yeah.
completely.
It's impossible to come to this country.
Well, that's what I was getting at. I don't know what it means when everyone's talking about income inequality. Is there a presumption that income equality is good?
We're not arguing that. We're not arguing that. That's a separate issue.
So you're just arguing that income inequality is okay, but exorbitant inequality,
Like the spikes we saw.
like the spikes, that's just really bad.
Yes.
And it's really bad because why?
It leads to economic. Well, it's one of the she was saying that
The spikes are really bad because
they lead to economic crisis.
Because there's too much money floating around that has to get invested in risky projects. Secondly,
And there's a credit boom as
a credit boom, okay?
due to the fact that the
Okay.
lower classes want to keep up to their middle or higher class income earners, and they spend money on credit to do that.
Okay, so that's one argument. And another argument on why these spikes are just are problematic or of concern.
It's not even just spikes, it's just high levels or consistently high levels anywhere. You can't have really high levels of income inequality and political stability. It doesn't happen.
Well, that's probably true, right? If you've got,
And if you can't have political stability, you can't have economic stability.
okay, so those spikes that you showed in your last diagram, where were they? They were in Canada.
That was in the
United
The United States, and as a result of that, was there political instability?
Well, you could look at 2008, like Occupy Wall Street, all the movements out of that, and now the incredibly partisan politics in the United States, I think would be seen as a result of the crisis.
So, risky investment, political instability, any others?
Well, he was talking about the social costs.
which causes political instability.
That was more, I guess, in the middle of the connector.
So how do you counter those then? they're saying inequality creates all this free money floating around that means that there's going to be a lot of risky investment. And how would you respond to that? How would you rebut that argument? Yes.
Can you respond to the connection between income inequality and political?
Yeah, okay, that's another.
They were talking about the issue with China, and I think it's really important to point out that while China does have a very high interregional inequality at this moment, but interregional inequality should not be seen as a static or a singular indicator in China right now, because China is geographically and demographically one of the largest countries in the world. It has 23 provinces and with more than, I think 56 ethnic groups. And furthermore, in dynamic analysis, China has recently just started helping itself out of poverty since Deng's reform in the late 1980s. So for such a huge, diverse, and scattered country, that's 20 years is actually a very short period of time for a country that's been equal but poor for such a long time. And so it takes much more time and effort than we would think for the wealth to distribute itself evenly across the provinces. I understand that people would be tempted to argue that the coastal regions of China are much more wealthier than the interior regions of China, and that could potentially be very dangerous for the long-term growth in China. But I think it's also, but we have to take note of the fact that the development trend in China right now is actually there's a huge trend that there's a high quantity of job opportunities that are opening up in the coastal region, and due to this trend, there is a huge population influx from the interior region to the coastal region, and under this population influx, wealth is actually being slowly transferred from the coastal region to the interior region of China in the form of income, infrastructure, and education. And so slowly, and it's slowly generating sustainable growth from the coast to the interior of China.
Great.
And that is only made possible because there is a huge quantity of job opportunities opening up in this one region.
But with all due respect, let's think of the countries that have political unrest. Arab Spring, Syria. We're now talking about the Russian Spring. Okay. What are name some other countries that have political unrest now? Zimbabwe. Sorry,
Turkey.
Yugoslavia.
Well, that's 10 years old, but so let's leave that one. Turkey. Central African Republic, Democratic Republic of Congo. Most of Africa. What is obvious in those countries, actually? Income inequality. So it's suspicious that the income inequality, it raises this question. Is it the income inequality that causes this political unrest? I mean, I'm no political scientist, but I would say people got pissed off with what was going on in Libya and Tunisia, and they're saying, hey, look, 90% of us in Egypt, 90% of us are working hard or graduating with university degrees who can't even get a job. And then there's guys driving around in Mercedes going shopping at Harrods, Syria, same thing. Basically, people said, Assad, enough is enough. Zimbabwe, enough is enough. And all the other countries in Africa, right? So it's suspicious, anyway, that this gentleman's argument, whose name I forget. Christian. Yeah, he says, well, look, this income inequality certainly creates the potential for unrest. When it's not quite so, the variance isn't quite so large, people can deal with it. But when you've got 1 or 2% or 3% driving around in Mercedes and living in palaces, people get upset. That's what his argument is.
But I think the issue with inequality is that it's.
And let's take China right now. China right now, there's a lot of income inequality there.
Yeah.
There's true, you've got 1 billion who are peasant farmers, and you got 400 million who are doing fairly well, actually, relatively speaking, or not even relatively speaking, they're doing fairly well. The reason that the Central Communist Party clamps down on human rights and any kind of dissent and clamps down on the internet is because they're worried about political unrest. And they're worried about political unrest because they don't want the 1 billion from inland China, mainland China, let's say, coming to the coast and creating a revolution. What's interesting, I find, about China is, why can't you find out what the leaders of the Communist Party are making? Why is it a secret?
They're spending all the money. Fancy homes.
Well, the government is targeting corruption right now. And
They say that, but that's like the government investigating themselves.
Even look at Baidu, it's like Google in China, they restrict so much content on there, you can't see any of it.
I think it's very
Yeah.
difficult to just assume that, I mean, like you said, I guess you can say it's a bit iffy, but to say that income inequality directly causes like economic crises, like, I mean, even in Libya, there, before the Arab Spring, they had the best living standards among all African countries. They were doing pretty well.
Who did?
The Libyans.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and with the Central African Republic, there's a lot of government corruption. And I think there are a lot of other exogenous factors that.
Yeah, they're all different situations, but even if not, I mean, okay, the Libyans are doing well, but they still have concerns, clearly. If everything was great, nobody's out in the streets, and everything's doing great. So there's all sorts of reasons, but it's a different situation in each country.
If I'm not mistaken, it was started in Tunisia with a fruit vendor who was fed up with not being able to make a living and lit himself on fire.
What I'd be interested, yes, what I'd be interested in here is their argument, which is rather interesting one. They're saying there was this flood of money floating around, super money, international money, and it was looking for a place to make a return. So it gravitated for some strange reason to the United States, which created this increase in the supply of money, which pushed down interest rates. You get the subprime mortgage issue where you've got banks loaning out money to people who could fog a mirror, right? And you're getting at 3% when the prime is 5%. That increased the demand for housing, which created the asset bubble, and on and on and on. Now, their argument, as I understand it, is you had so much of this free money floating around because you had 1% getting 25% of the income, and they didn't know, they'd already bought their 7 palaces, they've already got 10 Mercedes, so what are they going to do with the rest of this money? And so their argument is that that created the recession and was a disincentive for economic growth. It caused economic problems. That's their argument, as I understand it, in simple terms. How do you reply to that? Because it's an interesting argument. Their argument is the super rich had so much extra money, they had to invest it in all kinds of risky projects, and that created risk in the system and caused economic downturns. Correct? What do you think about that?
I think the thing about both of our arguments is we're kind of standing on separate sides of like a maximum threshold where they're saying that, you know, obviously it's the extreme cases that cause bad things, and we're saying that in moderate, like, to an extent it can be good. So it's hard to, deny.
Well, I've read this argument. I've seen this argument. There's some validity in it, or it's certainly worth thinking about. The super rich had so much money, they had to put it aside. And it ended up going into, for reasons that aren't really all that important, it ended up going into house mortgages in the US at really, really low rates. The fact that it was a really low rate wasn't just the fact that you had inequality, it was also greedy banks. But having said that, you had all this money floating around, which was the impetus or the spark that caused the subprime mortgage.
I give you a gun, you kill somebody with my fault.
It's a good point. What do you think about that? You got billions and billions of dollars looking for a place to find a return. And it ends up finding a return in cheap mortgages in the US, which fed the demand for houses that created a bubble, which eventually burst. For reasons I don't really know. I don't know what was the pin that burst the bubble. Do you guys know? Anybody know? You got house prices going up and up and up and up, and all of a sudden, poof, something, burst that bubble.
Wasn't it interest increase, because the subprime mortgages weren't fixed interest, they
It might, that
they
would
were